Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 3, Episode 8, Slip. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 3, Episode 8. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So when I saw the title of this episode, I thought, uh-oh, is Jimmy going back to his slipping Jimmy ways? And is this what lands him in potential trouble? Because a slip had me thinking of slipping Jimmy, and also perhaps has a double meaning that he slipped from his probation. Well, that was kind of the case, kind of not. He did in some ways go back to his slipping Jimmy ways, and it is a risk in doing so because he's on probation, but he didn't go full on, full on con man mode, nor did he get into any legal trouble. Well, not yet anyway, but overall, I found this episode to be very enjoyable. A cog in the machine that helped push the whole season forward. Nothing groundbreaking, but still very entertaining. So let's start with the Jimmy storyline. We start the episode with a flashback to when he was slipping Jimmy and see him hanging out with the now departed Marco, who is still alive at this stage, and he is reminiscing about these rare coins he got from his father's shop and further explains his father's history and how he was a sucker who let anyone walk over him, and in fact Jimmy refers to him as a bad businessman. This would come to tie into the theme of the episode, and that is Jimmy learning that being a legitimate legal businessman, an honest man who is very nice to people, is a shit way to earn money, and the best way is to be conniving, which is kind of why he became Slipping Jimmy in the first place. So, as in last week's episode, we saw him down on his luck and having issues trying to run a legitimate business. And this episode starts with, at first, things look like they're starting to look up for him, as the music store guys he did the free commercial for have apparently done well by this commercial, so have decided to hit him back for more. But that one guy who always seemed a bit like an asshole to me, he doesn't even admit that he was wrong about the commercial not being helpful. Anyway, he comes back after speaking directly to the station and says that it's cheaper to air it themselves. But Saul points out that that doesn't include production, but then they point out that they don't need 7 more commercials, you can just go with the one they have. But the nicer one does point out that he did give them the first one for free, so they offered to pay him for the first one and then go on their own to air it themselves. But Jimmy insists that the commercial doesn't belong to them and is the rights of Saul Goodman production, which pisses them both off. And so they're like, oh, so that's how you want to play it. And they say that their offer is off the table, and they simply hire their own film students and make their own video. Now, some may see their point of view and say that they're being smart businessmen and say that Saul is actually trying to rip them off here. But that's not how I really see it. Saul went out of his way to do a free commercial and air it for them for free, to which they have already benefited from financially, and in return they threatened to give him nothing and turn him away and move forward without him. So regardless, I think that they are the clear assholes in this case. However, that doesn't necessarily mean Jimmy is justified in what he does next. So he tells the cameraman to roll and then slips on a drumstick and calls for an ambulance. So obviously he's doing his old slipping Jimmy routine here. And the funny thing is, I think the asshole of the pair knew exactly what Jimmy was doing, because he looked pissed off from the very beginning. But the nicer one, I think, was actually fooled, at least at first. When Jimmy started talking about their insurance, I think they were both smart enough to catch on. So, do I think this means Jimmy will, go full on back to his slipping Jimmy ways? No, not necessarily. I think he saw that as a great way to get back at those assholes who were trying to screw him. And although I don't agree with what he did, I do think they did deserve it. So anyway, The next we see of Jimmy, he's made out well off of his stunt and is square with the TV station and has enough money to pay Kim for the next 6 weeks' rent, and has a new guitar to boot. Not just any guitar, but the signed one that he was mulling over before. And Kim offers to pay for his part of the rent until he gets back on his feet, but he outright refuses and insists that he'll do it himself, and thus is setting himself up for more difficulty. While it seems like he's gotten himself out of the debt to the station, and he's square with Kim for like a month and a half. I think that's all the slip earned him, and after that he'll be right back where he started, desperately needing money. And so Jimmy here is showing the same flaw most characters in the Breaking Saul universe show, and that is pride. Just like Walter White and Mike, Jimmy is letting his pride get the better of him and thus setting himself up for some trouble. So we then see Jimmy back out doing the community service thing, and this guy asks to leave and then come right back so he can see his sick daughter in the hospital, but the park supervisor refuses to let him go, and so Jimmy recognizes immediately who he is and why he wants to leave. Rhymes with mugmealer. I absolutely love that line. Anyway, he offers a way to let him leave and keep his hours for $700. The guy is skeptical but agrees, and then Jimmy just lies on the ground, to which the supervisor comes over and threatens to take his hours away, and Jimmy then threatens to sue him personally. And at first the guy is not worried until Jimmy gives a pretty convincing spiel about how much it would cost him, and he could lose all of his money, and even if he doesn't win the lawsuit, he could lose a lot of money. And I wonder if the supervisor knows that Jimmy is a lawyer. I kept expecting Jimmy to bring up the fact that he's a lawyer, but perhaps he already knows. So eventually the guy is convinced, so he lets Jimmy lay down on the ground and lets the mugmealer visit his daughter. So he happily pays Jimmy the $700, saying it was the best money he never spent, and Jimmy's quite happy with himself as he gets to lay down. So this, I believe, is the beginning of Saul Goodman, as Jimmy here is learning that conning people is in making him more money, but rather than doing legitimate business like he was trying with that ads thing. However, there's a major difference here than when he came to the same sort of revelation in the season 2 premiere, as there he was just going back to being slipping Jimmy and doing the same old thing that he used to do. However, here, with the community service guy at least, he uses his knowledge of the law in order to accomplish this, thus combining his con life with his lawyering life, which ultimately is what he will end up doing when he becomes Saul Goodman. And more importantly, he learned that the drug dealers and petty criminals make good clients, and he was able to see, through them, speak their language, so to speak, and use his skills to help them out and thus make money off of them. So earlier I made a prediction that once Jimmy's 1-year suspension is up, he won't go back to elder law and will become a criminal lawyer named Saul Goodman, and that prediction is looking better than ever, as he now has established the Saul Goodman name with the production company, but I don't think he's going to do any more commercials. He's going to do something involving criminals, and once his law license is back, I believe he'll simply carry on using that name because it would have already been established in the criminal world, or at least that's just my guess. What he could do in the meanwhile while he waits for his license to be renewed, I'm not entirely sure. I'm curious to see what that will be. So now let's get to Chuck, because we learn in this episode that Chuck has been getting better, and the doctor we saw him call was the same doctor we saw in the hospital that was insisting his condition was mental, which surprised me because she's a medical doctor and it seems like he needs more of a psychologist, but apparently she's been treating him, or at least counseling him, and he's been getting better as he has come to terms with the fact that his condition is all in his head. So we see him go to the grocery store, which is still painful for him, but he has a system to ignore or overcome this pain by noticing the color of things. And when he goes into the refrigeration aisle where there's a lot of buzzing and electricity, it looks like he's about to freak out, but next time we see him, he has his groceries, so he's actually doing okay. But then Howard comes to visit with news about the malpractice insurance, and after we saw Jimmy made them aware of Chuck's condition and outburst, we know the news Howard brings is not good. So I do wonder if this bad news is going to set Chuck's condition back. I guess we'll just have to see. So speaking of Howard, let's get to Kim's storyline, as we see Kim at a business lunch with her Mercer Verde clients, who are still extremely pleased with her work, so much so that they ask her to help out one of their other business partners. She's hesitant at first, but agrees to take a look and refer them to some other firm. Later, we see she changes her mind and decides not to just send a package, but to actually have a meeting with him herself, and I'm still not entirely sure what this is all about and what it's setting up, but we'll just see. But anyway, Howard runs into her at lunch, and he stops by and says hello. I'm still not entirely sure what the point of this was. Perhaps to remind Mercer Verde that she used to work in the mailroom, trying to sort of put her down in some way. Not that would make any difference because they're so pleased with her, but whatever. After seeing him, though, Kim goes over to him when he's with his clients and hands him a check for the student loan that they had borrowed. They had a student loan she had borrowed with them, but they had paid off for her as a gift. But she's paying it back, and she says hello to the clients, which Howard introduced her, and they're all really nice and polite to each other. So I love the passive aggressiveness in this scene, as they are all so very polite with one another. But as soon as we learn that Howard is actually pissed off at Kim for the damage she did to his firm's reputation, Kim, as we learned, is feeling guilty for what she did to Chuck and wants to pay Howard the money back for her loan as a way to ease her conscience. Perhaps Howard recognizes this, which is why he tears it up. It's kind of funny, though, the way he strikes back at her is refusing to take $15,000 from her. Okay, I guess that's lawyers for you. And also, Howard ripping up the check for a lot of money is very reminiscent of Jimmy ripping up Howard's check for a lot of money in the first episode. So Howard makes it clear that Kim is his enemy now, but Kim retorts that all she did was point out the truth of the situation, and if he was hiding this from his clients, then that's his own fault. And frankly, I'm completely on Kim's side. It was Chuck's own fault for going after Jimmy, and Howard's fault for helping him do it, so he's kind of reaping what he sows. But knowing how Kim feels guilty, I think this will actually make her feel even worse. So now let's get into Nacho. His storyline was pretty straightforward. First, we see him putting ibuprofen in the pills. I'm not entirely sure if ibuprofen will react badly with Hector's condition or if it will simply do nothing when Hector needs help. I'm not sure, but I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me. But either way, I'm sure it will be very bad for Hector. So we see him practicing how to throw the pills in the coat pocket and failing badly, and then his father comes in the morning and we get a bit of their relationship as they appear to have a strong, loving father-son relationship. And I really appreciate this because this really humanizes Nacho, and I think that's a great, as rather than being a generic thug, you really feel for Nacho and understand him better, as his father's actually an upstanding working man who cares about his family and is simply trying to do his best. And Nacho seems to have just gotten mixed up with the wrong people, and now because his father could potentially be killed. And don't get me wrong, Nacho has done some really shady things. He's by no means an angel, but you can really feel for him and see that underneath he is still in part a good person. And again, that's something that the show has done really well with a lot of characters. So then we get this great scene of Nacho actually, pulling off the switch, and this scene was great and super tense. So in my review for episode 5 this season, Chicanery, I talked about the heist movie trope, that whenever we see our characters planning the heist, something will go wrong with the heist to keep it more interesting. But when we don't see our characters planning the heist, and thus don't know what the plan is, the heist will go off without a hitch, such as in Chicanery, where we had no idea what Jimmy and Kim's plan to get Chuck was, so seeing it unfold was exciting. Well, this scene actually breaks that convention. As you do see Nacho planning it, and it goes off without a hitch. But it still really worked as a scene, as it was still just super intense, because if Nacho messes up in any way, he would die a horrible death. So this was really high stakes for him, and Michael Mondo has Nacho does such an amazing job in the scene, playing the subtleties of how terrified he was, but at the same time he was trying to hide this fear from Hector. It was just so well done. I particularly like that after he successfully made the shot with the pills into the jacket, we see that his hands are shaking. That was a really nice touch. So now we know that Hector has the fake pills. It's just a matter of seeing what becomes of this. So finally, let's get to Mike, who we see in this episode digging with a metal detector for a while, and another one of Gilligan's typical stylistic montages until he finds a dead body. So apparently this is the Good Samaritan that Hector had killed, who had found that truck that Mike had hijacked. So obviously he still feels responsible for this person's death. We then see him calling the tribal police and letting them know where the body is there. Now, I don't think that this is about Mike trying to oust Hector or get him in trouble with the law. I think this is more about him trying to ease his conscience by giving the dead man's family closure. But it's obviously, this still weighs on his conscience as he feels responsible. So this reinforces the no half measures mantra. So next time, I doubt that Mike will have any reservations about killing when he needs to. We then see him sitting along with his money, the money that he stole from Hector's truck, but he is unable to really do anything with it because it's not legitimate money. So in other words, he needs to launder it. It's funny, when Walter White needed to launder money, he went to Saul, but at this stage it seems like Jimmy isn't quite able to, set up something like that. So instead, Mike goes to Gus. And this is very interesting. Gus warns that doing so would be difficult because if the Salamancas found out they were working together, that would be very bad for both of them. But it's interesting, when Mike offers Gus money, he turns it down, saying that he could not take money from his family. So obviously Gus has something else in mind for Mike to pay him back with. So it'd be interesting to see what that is. I do wonder how Nacho's plan to kill Hector will affect Gus's plans, as he obviously has some plan to deal with Hector Salamanca, and I wonder if Mike will tell Gus about Nacho, or perhaps Gus already knows about what Nacho is doing. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Anyway, the episode ends with a handshake between Gus and Mike, which is quite significant, knowing that Mike will eventually become Gus's right-hand man, so it will be really interesting to see how this all plays out. So my rating for Slip out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. A well-paced, interesting episode with a lot of great, well-acted moments that push forward a lot of these character storylines and made big steps towards moving these characters towards where we know they will be in Breaking Bad, and ultimately making me really excited to see the final 2 episodes of the season. So that's it for my review of Slip. Be sure to check back here as I continue to review episodes of Better Call Saul. Also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Dark Matter, Orphan Black, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.